Beloveds, today we are joined by Conference Minister. I'm told that he is dad to many, even not the biological ones. We have my co-host, Reverend Elder Carmarian Anderson, joining us today, who calls Reverend Dave Papa. And so it's good to be here with you for our first installment of our Future of Faith series. Beloveds, many of us are living in the most divided times that we have known, where each of us are being asked to embody the uncertainty of our inter and intra-personal relationships. This includes our faith. What does it mean to deepen or return to our faith, both individually and collectively, in order to care for all of God's marvelous creation? Our Future of Faith series is curated to help us learn from people like David, for religious leaders, thought leaders across the world to help congregations and communities explore the themes that make us us during this time, a space where we can know that collective dignity and love and kindness and respect is honored, and that our different perspectives of faith can actually be used together to build up a better world. And I am sorry, Sarah, I just popped back on and saw that it is snowing in Kansas. That sounds horrific. And also, I'm going to be in 90 degrees here in the Southwest. So there you go. We show that we can all exist in different weather temperatures. But it is great to have you here. Oh, Reverend David Long-Higgins, welcome, welcome, welcome. How
Thank
is
you.
it with your soul today?
I am so excited to be with you and so many friends and others who I hope, will become friends through this conversation in some way, although it's kind of a strange arrangement being in a webinar space. And Kamarian, so great to see you. Oh my gosh, really. It is well with my soul, despite what I call the whiplash of the world. Uh,
Mm,
and some of you who know me know that I'm a kind of a glass half full personality many days. And but not Pollyanna. And we'll talk more about that certainly. It's well with my soul because I have the great privilege of being with extremely creative people, not people who don't carry exhaustion,
mm,
not people who aren't aware of what's going on in the world and all of its terrible tragedy,
mm.
but people who nonetheless, grounded in the spirit, still keep showing up, sharing their energy and deeply their love. And it changes me every time I encounter that in others. And I hope, obviously, to bring some into that space as well. But that for me reminds me that God is not done with us.
Mm.
And there is not only important work to do, but important strength to be found as we discover that in each other and the Spirit working in the midst of all of that. So that's what on a Monday, that's what I bring today. So how's that? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely perfect. I hear you say that we can be multitudes all at the very same time.
That's so true. And I think we don't have to let go of hope. Uh, in fact, it's important that we not let go of hope. We can both inhabit the terribly urgent challenges that we are facing in the world and in so many arenas. And we can also discover the deep, resilient energy of the spirit at work in us, especially as we're bound together in community. I absolutely. I know it not just intellectually, but viscerally and experientially. That's a large part of what keeps me going, honestly, in this work that we share. Mm.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you are noticing those relationships with all of the things beyond yourself that help you maintain this really complex leadership role that you're in. And so I'm hoping that you can share a little bit with us. What is your ministry context? How do you view that with who you are?
Sure. So, some of you who are on this webinar will know that the Heartland Conference, which used to be the Ohio Conference, is the conference that has ministry in all of the UCC congregations of the in Ohio, one in West Virginia, eight in Northern Kentucky. We have 308 congregations uh, together. And our context is we're differently organized in that our associations, which are fairly large, um, are separately incorporated. So we live in a delicate dance of relationship. And when the UCC came into being, we were a conference of over 650 congregations. Now we have, as I said, 308. And um, so the way in which we are discovering the empowering creativity in our life has shifted. We don't have specialists in the conference setting, stewardship and young adult ministry and youth ministry and so forth. uh, what I find is we have wisdom and energy throughout our life, and that's always been the case. So
Mm.
when I think about conference ministry in this context, and I think probably this is true across the board in the United Church of Christ, but I'm going to speak particularly to the Heartland reality because that's the one that I'm called to serve. I think we are called to be the cultivators of creative, spirit-filled collaboration
Mm.
so that we can have uh, cultivating space where the already inhabiting giftedness and energy and creativity exists, but oftentimes needs ways to get connected with others. So one of the ways we've been doing that, and you and I have talked about this, is through online networks that have a fourfold purpose, really, to inspire, to connect, to equip, and to support one another. And that can be you don't have to be elected to these. All you have to have is a passion or desire to grow in a particular area. So, creation, care, and justice, and pro-racial equity, and veteran ministry. We have on average 22 veterans complete suicide every day in our country,
Mhm.
and that's a so there. So we have a group that's really centering in of veterans who are working together to say, how can the church be a space that many vets don't even want to touch because of their experience of church, yet also carry a tremendous need in terms of what's carried inside their souls in terms of soul repair and so forth. So we've been working at how do we listen carefully to where the passion is that people carry related to ministry and find ways to help more and more folks find each other.
Mm.
The expertise is everywhere. It's not located in one individual or in one setting or one office. So
Yeah.
what's exciting for me about that is to find people to listen carefully to people's passion and to say, I've had, and this is how the Spirit works in my life, in this work, in this season, is, God will like hit me upside the head with like three or four conversations around the same kind of thing with people in different corners of our life. And I will say, this feels to me like a nudge. And I'll say to these folks, would you be interested in meeting with other people who also carry this passion that you're carrying? Very often, almost always, the answer to that question is yes.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
desire to be connected to other folks. And
Yeah.
one conversation leads to another and to another, right? And sometimes it's a short-lived kind of engagement, sometimes it's longer, but in this season where we are technologically maybe overwhelmed, but certainly connected, but sometimes still feel a relational deficit and isolation from each other and loneliness. How do we overcome that in a way that can be really meaningful? And that's so that for me is what my context and work is. In addition, to the wonderful connections I have with folks like yourself and Karmarian and others in the national setting and the global setting of the church, as our um, we have folks who are connected in all kinds of ways throughout the conference. And the way we organize ourselves in the United Church of Christ, there are particular ways we connect. And in the conference minister role, one of those is to be a representative of the conference in some of those wider conversations. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
You just said something that I think is a great next question is to me, I hear you say that you are gifted, if you will, the ability to pay attention and be present with people as they share with you whatever it is that they're sharing with you, and that you can draw that connection. You can be like, oh, I am present here, and also I'm going to connect you with somebody who also has something very similar. And how can I empower you to be to lift up your ministry? How can I empower you to see what it is that you are about is its own, its own collective goal towards dreaming, right? And I know that you have witnessed over the last few years so many things that have happened. You share about not only these connections that you can make with folks, but how you were once a conference that looked like this, and the conference is now looking like this. I'm curious, what maybe where have you found the dreaming space? What is the dreaming that is possible about the role of faith, or even faith practitioners, that you can lift up in your experiences of being a denomination that started here and became more intimate to those simple conversations that you have with folks?
Yeah, I think it happens certainly in probably a number of different contexts and layers, and those are connected. Um, so right now we're engaging significant conversations with the Indiana Kentucky Conference, and we're actually doing some of that network work, like around mental health, talking
Mhm.
about our open and affirming network, finding ways to come together and work together. So I think because of the gift of technology, if there's a strange if there's one gift that we could identify amidst many tragic things that happened during the height of COVID, it was that it kicked a church that would have otherwise taken 20 or 30 years maybe to use technology in the way we use it every day now. We're here online together. Uh,
Mhm.
we don't, it's not like we're going to meet on Zoom. What's Zoom? It's, oh, okay. Are we meeting on Zoom or in person, right? Or whatever the online platform might be. So with the normalization of being able to use that and have the technology use not be a thing, but that's just part of the
Mhm.
reality that we have, it gives us the opportunity to find more and more partners. And I think the listening that I'm trying to do in our life together is as I hear people talk about their journeys, what's encouraging and what's exhausting too.
Mhm.
What is yearning to grow?
Mhm.
What is yearning to grow here?
Mhm.
And what kind of watering or
Mhm.
cultivating of the ground might help that yearning to grow into some kind of flourishing? And if we can pay attention to that, and this is not about coming with an agenda. It is really about deep listening. That if we listen deeply to one another, we will begin to discover the Spirit is already present, wanting to make itself known in all kinds of really remarkable ways. And our job, it seems to me, is to nurture and cultivate and create as healthy and positive a space around that as we can, recognizing that this is bumpy road territory. We're not going to always get it right and all that kind of stuff. And if we keep trying, that that charism in us will grow in capacity and depth. And by capacity and depth, I mean there will be a freedom from ourselves enough to be available to another with a deepness, a depth of love that really frees and encourages whatever that is that the person is identifying that their
Yeah.
growth is. And that's different for everybody, right? And I mean, in terms of their particular expression of it, but it also has amazing connecting points. And I think that's what's exciting to me is discovering, oh, I I'm hearing connecting points. And it's not about um some kind of manipulation of that, like, okay, but really an honoring of what people are
Mhm.
bringing, and I hope an encouragement at some level. That's most of my work, I think, I try at least to, is about encouragement. Um, in what way does the heart, literally, is the heart growing larger around this?
Yeah. And thank you for that. I think a lot about what is it that we can remember for our own selves, that moment of somebody coming into our life that helped us believe in ourselves, right? I feel
Yeah.
that whenever I'm with you, right, is you help me imagine this time of feeling like you believe in my ministry, you believe in my uh, odd questions. You believe in the incomplete thoughts that I have. And it is something that we need so much right now. This that you use this metaphor of gardening, I think a
Mhm.
lot, right? So how is
Yeah.
it that we're planting? What is yearning to grow? How is it that we're watering? And then even when you talk about getting it right, when you go to capacity and depth, you have to prune in
Mhm.
order for there to be capacity for the plant to grow and for the depth, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And as you say that, Ellie, I'm thinking about what is it, and I'm still going to talk about Dave Long-Higgins, not to center myself,
please.
but what do I need to let go of
Mm,
in order for that which God wants to do newly in me?
mm,
And I think that's true of the church as the body of Christ. What do we need to let go of in order to make space for the new thing that God wants? And this is biblical, it's all over the New Testament, right? The
yeah.
pruning that makes the growth possible. And and the challenge is it's not always very clear. I mean, sometimes it's very clear, but sometimes it's not. And so to begin to have the courage to test things and to risk, oh, maybe we pruned a little too much there. Um, and uh, stasis is death, right?
Mm,
You can't, um, there is at work in the universe of life an urge towards growth that
hmm
has its beginning and end in God.
hmm
And you cannot, if to be alive is to be in tune with this, right? And to continually be available to it. I was thinking just before we got on about John Batiste's the musician work, and there's this wonderful Netflix documentary about him. If
hmm
you haven't seen it,
hmm
I highly recommend it.
hmm
Thing I love about many things about his work and his I would say theological because that's where I come from, but his philosophical at the very least approach that there is always more space in the symphony for more different kinds of music and so um uh what how do we make space for the addition of more and more different instruments to come into the symphony that God is yearning to be born. The challenge right now in the world in which we live, and kind of our promo lines had it, that fascism and other energies at work in the world in which we live um, work against this energy of the possibility of a symphony of the many. And in their way, deprive the human family of the possibilities of the extraordinary and the beautiful from rising into the fullness that I believe God intends us to experience. So, so question then for the church, it seems to me, is how do we become agents of of willing cooperation with this energy that yearns to form something more beautiful and good for more and more and more of the human family.
Yeah.
I think when you and I were talking, some months ago, I shared with you, I have a working definition of justice. It's always in process and always in revision. So this is March. 16th edition of that. Um,
Subject to change in three
so
hours.
subject to change at any time, right? It seems to me, um, the work towards an arrangement of life empowered by agape love
Mm,
that enables all God's children to freely use their gifts without fear for the upbuilding of the common good and the good of creation, so that all may creatively flourish, sharing in God's abundance and joy. And each piece of that has really important dimensions to it. And
mm,
an arrangement of life. So justice is not just about equality or equity, though those are important dimensions of it, but it's a movement towards joy, you know. And for me, I think of Jesus in with the disciples, at the end, towards the end of his ministry, as he's getting them ready for all that's to come with the crucifixion and so forth, he reminds them, I come that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. And so the move of justice is a movement towards joy. The end, the telos towards which justice moves is joy, not just equality or equity, but joy.
yeah.
And I think this is, for me, this is where the power to keep on the work is, because the end towards which we're working is joy. And we might taste bits of it along the way. In fact, we do. And that's where, Jean-Baptiste's work for me as an expression of this is the joy of American Symphony, right? And I have to believe that everywhere Jesus goes, everywhere Jesus goes, he moves to the margins, and there is more joy, there's more life as a result of his move towards those who otherwise aren't yet included in the symphony, right? And,
Yeah.
and for me, that uh, has to be instructive if we're going to say that we're
Mm,
followers of Jesus. Um,
yeah.
uh,
Definitely. Well, folks don't know on the other end of the screen, Reverend David Long-Higgins is a beautiful musician I love that you brought in that idea of the symphony, right? Because if anybody has ever shown up early to a concert, you know that there is what we like to say is a cacophony of
mhm,
sounds. It's as if the different instruments and
mhm,
musicians and voices are coming together in order to seek that harmony. And it can be off-putting, right? Until you get to that moment, but it needs to happen. The cacophony needs to happen. It's like watching 6-year-olds go play soccer for the first time. It's the
mhm,
clump of chaos, and then all of a sudden a goal happens, and you're like, ah,
mhm,
this is
mhm.
great.
Yeah.
We can experience joy. We can be uncomfortable. And I think that this is something I want to touch a little bit on. I've been thinking a lot about our red lines in regards to what is that tipping point for us to become involved in action, right? Like in whatever way that action is. And I feel like the red line is people have grown too accustomed to their comfort. And what I hear you saying is in talking about symphony and talking about this justice ever changing, talking about the church,
Mhm,
doing these things, like it really is about this just this movement towards the peace, the movement towards the joy, the movement towards the justice means you have to be uncomfortable. Did I hear that right?
Oh, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There is no growth without, we call it growing pains for a reason,
Sure,
right?
sure.
And because there's something that stretches in the body. So,
Hmm.
using the body of Christ imagery, if there's going to be growth, there will be discomfort.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it's necessary in order for whatever is to emerge to have space. And I think, we live in very uncomfortable times.
Yeah.
So that, and that's not, you know, because it requires something of us to show up for one another,
Yeah.
and in what we could not have imagined is unspeakable uh,
Mm.
experience of human beings,
Yeah.
children of God, right?
Yeah.
And um, the question is, what will be the sustaining energy for us because it's easy to burn out? How do we
Mm.
keep showing up? And how do we discern what is our particular way of showing up? Not everyone will show up with placards and signs. Some will show up, by the letters they write,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
the advocacy they do. Some will show up because they make the casseroles for the people who are
Yep.
on the streets. I mean, everybody will have their role, but I think at the heart of it is all of it. It seems to me has to grow out of an articulation of the truth that God names about Jesus, that everyone is beloved.
Yes.
Everyone is beloved.
Yeah.
And if we lose a sense that everyone is beloved, and the real challenge is even our enemies are beloved. So how do we interrupt the energies operative with, you know, King says, hate cannot drive out hate, right? Only love can do that.
Yeah.
And that's not some glib. That's the discipline of seeking the good of the other. Agape is to seek the other's greatest good. So how do we do that? Many different ways, of course, but I think one is how do we get into arrangements where we can really start to listen carefully to each other's stories, especially with those people with whom we disagree.
Yeah.
How do we cultivate space for that possibility to happen? And I think that's one of the calls of the church right now is to how do we cultivate space for people to be together in uncomfortable space
Yeah.
because not everybody has the same ideas about things. And
Yeah.
and I think um, when I was at Davidson Canal, Winchester, where my wife Beth and I were pastors for many years, we um, we developed a thing called the Understanding Project. That we realized back in 2016, that there was a need for a different kind of space to emerge. And we realized that though people had been worshiping with each other for a very long time, they
Mm.
didn't really know each other well.
Hmm.
And so the question, it seems to me, in our local settings is how do we become more deliberate laboratories of love that are
Yeah.
expressed in hearing each other's stories in such a way that we can begin to understand what has been formational for people.
Yeah.
Everybody gets to a certain idea because of a whole host of hidden things that are their history that they're carrying with them.
Mm-hmm.
And can we cultivate space so that we have the ability to really listen carefully to each other?
Yeah.
Um, what I've discovered is that when you start to do that, something shifts. It's not that everybody comes to the same opinion about things, but the capacity to love deepens the capacity to listen and to be in each other's presence. And sometimes change does happen in all directions.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's a form of showing up that's different than the more public expressions that we are very familiar with of necessity because of the what's been going on with ICE. Um, but I think these are really important because they hone in us a, a, a different kind of what I call spiritual capacity to be able to be present to each other and be present, especially present to people who may think differently than we might be thinking about something. So,
Yeah, and that's like the forever difficult question to answer, right? Like we have so many of those, but like what does it look like for us to be in relationship and to be present with the people who we disagree with deeply and that they're family members,
mhm.
right? How do we sit down with our aunts and uncles, our cousins, our brothers, our sisters, our parents, and engage in these really perhaps difficult conversations? I hear you say, first be present, be open to the Spirit moving in through us to hear and maybe just listen to where somebody's story might take you, because more often than not, you will find a connection, and not a counterpoint, but a connection.
I think that's, you said something really important is, can we listen for connectivity rather than reactivity?
Yeah.
Um, and and it may take some time to discover that. I think that's the other thing is, when you talk about cultivation, I have a saying, you can't stand over a tomato and yell grow. Um, you have to, you cultivate, right?
Can
And
I ask a question real quick?
yeah,
How did that become a saying?
it just occurred to me,
Okay. I love it.
yeah. Um, uh, you just, any gardener knows. I mean, I do believe, I talk to my plants, so
Yeah.
Beth will tell you. But I think that, uh, the reality, it's the cultivation of the ground, right?
Yeah.
So what are we doing to cultivate the ground?
Yeah.
While at the same time recognizing that there are urgent life and death realities going on
Mm,
all around us,
mhm,
um,
mhm.
and to not treat those lightly. So it's like we have all this stuff going on at the same time. We want to cultivate the ground, and we
Yeah.
want people's lives to be
Yeah.
saved from
Yeah.
unspeakable harm, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Where do you turn to in order to find comfort when you're in that duality of knowing that these horrible things can happen while also you're cultivating that ground, you're adding the nutrients to the
yeah,
soil.
I think for me, contemplative prayer is very important. Uh, I think I'm a writer of prayers, and
Mhm.
most of the prayers, I share one a week with our conference, but most of my prayers are not shared. Most of those are, because it's what I need. But
Yeah.
silence for me is also a really important discipline. And I think in the cacophony you mentioned earlier, so a metaphor that I use this with in children's times, if on those occasions when a church will trust me with that, sacred time of the children's message. Um, and I'll have my violin with me out of tune, and I will tune. You talk about the cocoon. Everyone who plays an instrument knows you got to tune up before you play.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this is a great metaphor of the spiritual life. Worship for me is a tuning, prayer
Mm,
is a tuning. And
mm,
I know how easy it is, because of the humidity of my own soul, for
mm.
myself to get out of tune. And so I need to be retuned again and again regularly.
Yeah.
And I find that that is an essential piece if I'm to not just completely lose perspective.
Yeah.
Scripture is key, certainly, because we were talking about this before we got on. If Jesus at the beginning, middle, and end, you have, through Christ, we see how love circulates in the human experience
Yeah.
full. And that, to me, I just have to keep coming back to, oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
you know, Go a second mile, love your enemies. Oh, I will lighten the burden,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
burden I will offer you is light. So, I think I need to be reminded about that. Uh,
Mm,
and I need to be engaged with others who are doing that. So it's
mm,
not just,
mm.
so it's a both, deeply personal, but never privatized. Because it needs to lead me to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, I want to invite our viewers to go ahead. If you have a question for Dave, please do put it into the Q&A feature. Again, that's a dialogue bubble with the question mark in the middle of it. We will get to those in the end. I did see some questions popping up in the chat, but if you could all move those over to that Q&A feature, that would be really, really helpful. I while we wait for those to populate, I have another question, if I
Mhm.
may. You and I ran into each other not too long ago, although actually it is kind of too long ago now. I think it was
Mm.
in 2024, we got a chance to meet at the West Virginia Council of Churches had a gathering. And that it was a representation of the ecumenical, right? Our national council of churches, and you and I have engaged in conversation many times about not only ecumenically what it is that we're called to be in the world collectively, but also from an interfaith perspective. And so I'm curious, what do you believe the role of this interfaith or interreligious collaboration might be for such a time that we find ourselves in?
Yeah. Well, I think fundamentally we are given birth to discover that we belong to each other.
Mm,
And we are formed by communities. But if those communities become isolated from the larger motion of God, which is to build the human family, we will continue to just circulate in the same morass that has been so often the lived experience of the human family.
yeah.
And so, I think it's urgent. One of the challenges in this day and time, as budgets get smaller and smaller in churches,
Mm,
the first thing oftentimes to go out of budgets is money to support ecumenical engagement.
yeah.
But in fact, I think we need it more. And, in the context of, I'm going to speak, I'm right now chair of the governing board of the Ohio Council of Churches. What we've been talking about in that context is we need each other more, not less, in this season. And the particular theological differences that we once held so tightly to as reasons that we should just stay in our own silos,
Hmm.
frankly, don't matter much to the world.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not to say that we shouldn't bring the gift that may be our unique gift to the table in the conversation. I'm not saying that at all. But that gift should not be used as a fence to keep us
Mm,
from the table.
mm,
And so, because what God yearns most is for our giftedness to be shared. And we need that because the demands of the world are so large and the need is so great that we have to find more and more ways to work together, both ecumenically within the Christian tradition and interfaith
yeah.
as as our siblings and other faith traditions bring gifts to us, even
Yeah.
as we bring gift. And I really think that um, this is there is not going to be a way forward for the human family apart from this deliberate engagement. The challenge for us, as we know in this day and time, is that our own Christian language is used to articulate a vision that is counter to what I've just described. So
Yeah.
Christian nationalism has usurped the language that carries the rich potential of us discovering God's motion of bringing us together.
Yeah.
And we have to be bold in our willingness to articulate an expression of Christianity that is unitive,
Mm,
and life-giving, and recognizes that diversity is not just a political statement, but a fundamental part of the design of
yeah.
God's inhabiting of the whole human uh, experience, and the care of the creation, which you know we live on this miraculous tiny ball in a cosmos, right? And
Right.
yeah,
Right. Yeah, so much beauty there. We have so many easy questions coming at you in the Q&A. I'm so being facetious right now. I hope you're ready.
go
I
for it.
love
Let's
these
do it.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I
Mm.
think this builds into a lot of what you were just saying. What does it look like for us to be gracious and courageous amidst so much violence, whether it be language or the othering, and then, of course, the violence of war? How is it that just the small little microcosm can make an impact on our larger world?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the question here. So if it looks like I'm looking away, it's
Yeah.
just I said I thought I should probably look at the questions here.
Yeah.
Um, I think the question for me is the distinction between looking, and I want to be very careful with what I'm about to say, so I might have to revise it as we go along.
Mhm.
But I think uh the oh, it just disappeared.
Put it under answered. Go
There we
under
go. Okay,
answered.
yeah.
Yep.
I think this gets back to how we prepare our spirit to be
Hmm.
available. So I think to be gracious and courageous amidst violent language, this is if you've done any nonviolent training in nonviolence, you know that a lot of the preparation has to do with oneself, a readying of the spirit, and also a deep readying to discover the God presence in another human being. Um, it is not to excuse violence. So I want to be very careful about. We can say a firm no to violence.
Yeah.
The challenge is how to do that without ourselves becoming violent,
Hmm.
and how to stand. And so I there's much learning I have yet to do in this whatever length of life I have, but I do know that it's easy to collapse into the very thing you say you don't want to be.
Yep. Yeah.
And it requires that's why spiritual disciplines matter. Not, there's this false dichotomy, prayer, spirituality, or action. That's ridiculous. You
Mhm.
cannot have sustained action without grounding.
Right.
And grounding without action is just navel gazing. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you have to have both of these working together. I think too, um, uh, it's important to know when to act and when to rest.
Mm.
You can't always be acting without rest. And so that's why we need community. I say I need community for all kinds of reasons, but one of the reasons I need it is I need others to step into spaces when I'm exhausted that I
Yeah.
can no longer step into.
Yeah.
And that we take some turns in that. I think also, um, I'm just looking here. How does it look like to be gracious and courageous amid the violent language? I think part of it is refusal to succumb to the violent language, the othering, and
Mm.
a war spirit,
Mm.
a, 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 a committed refusal to become part of that energy.
Yeah.
Because it's easy when things get escalating to turn to begin to simply mirror the behavior
Yeah.
that instead of interrupting it with an alternative.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about very challenging, difficult work, which is why we have to be in community, and we have to be
Yeah.
grounded in that. Uh, how do we impact the larger world? I think I love the adage, and everyone on this call knows this language, but just to bring it to the forefront, and that is how do we think globally and act locally, right? Um, Much of our impact will be small. Margaret Mead, all great movements of history start small. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
paraphrase, right? So I think if we can remember that the conversations we have with our neighbors who are saying incredibly, you know, we might say atrocious things, or, how do we position ourselves? How do we ready ourselves for the surprising thing that may
Yeah.
come out of the mouth of someone else? How do we
Yeah.
interrupt it with curiosity,
Yeah.
and do that in a way that can hopefully create an opening and not just build a higher wall? This is
Yeah.
this is very hard work. I have no illusions. This is
Yeah.
very hard work, and really requires our our deepest commitment and energy. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Can you, and thank you for that. Can you comment on ground rules for conversations to proceed without devolving into reactivity? So when you talk about that nonviolence training, perhaps you can share a little more.
Yeah, and I'm just a beginning student in like nonviolent community. I mean, there's some things that I've learned along the way, but I'm still learning. But in nonviolent communication, there's this, what is the need that somebody has? So can we agree that we're going to listen carefully? What's the need that underlies the opinion that's being
Mm,
expressed?
mm,
Can we discern that there is a need that's being expressed? It might be a need for safety. It might be, I don't know, there's some need that's being expressed through an opinion. Whether it's conscious or not is a whole nother question. But to listen with a holy
mhm,
curiosity. So I think a ground rule for first of all, when we talk about ground rules, we're talking about an arrangement of conversation where folks want to be in a conversation.
mhm, mhm,
So you have different kinds of conversations, and you have to recognize what kind of conversation am I in?
mhm.
And um and if you can you cultivate, I'm thinking in the one-on-one, a space where you say, I want to know more about your story.
Yeah,
And if you're willing, I'd like to share something about my story. And again, it gets back to what we're talking about. Can we discover common values, even if not we don't have common opinions?
yeah,
So, what are the common values that are operating?
yeah,
We all want safety for ourselves and our families.
yeah,
The question is, how do we construct that? And hopefully, more than just safety, hopefully, thriving and
yeah,
flourishing,
yeah,
creativity and beauty, right?
yeah,
So, how do we do that? Uh, so, I think it has to do with asking some very deliberate questions.
yeah,
And
yeah,
to love somebody enough to say, I've been sitting in the pew next to you for 30 years, but we've
yeah,
never really talked about this. I'd like to know
yeah,
what you think. You know, I'd like to know
yeah.
what you think. Or I don't know that I know your story. Let's start there.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
I could we have and think of that. What could happen if we really worked at that? So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, oh, we're rich. This is rich conversation. I love it. How do you champion a future of faith to those many who have lost their faith?
Mm.
Whew.
How do you champion a future of faith to those many who have lost their faith? Um, I think listening is the
Mm-hmm,
first act of loving.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that's not original with me by any means.
Yeah,
But I do think what happened? To ask the question, what happened that,
yeah,
what again, getting back to the story, and it requires again presence, can we be present to each other?
yeah.
Something happened that caused someone to lose their faith. Now, it may be that the container of their faith was no longer large enough to
Mm,
answer the experience of life that a person has had. And
mm-hmm.
no one gave them the gift of the possibility of
Yeah,
new and larger containers or forms.
yeah,
But first you have to listen, I think, and say, what happened for you?
yeah,
Um, and and then to introduce the possibility that there are other ways, other possibilities for engaging a faith journey. Um, but it has to be driven by really listening, I think, to another person's story
yeah.
deeply. Uh,
Yeah, and I think that, some of these other questions in that the folks have put in are that, right? It begins with the listening and understanding what happened. We have lots of assumptions that we might have about the problem, or about whatever it is, right? And without really knowing, I can think of just recently a conversation that I had with my son who was grown, and
Mhm.
he had made a comment about, well, that's why I don't like religion. I was like, what happened? Like let's have a conversation about this as somebody
Mhm,
whose parent is a pastor, right? I haven't been a pastor his whole life, so he's not a PK, right?
mhm,
And I was with him when we got to experience the different religious
mhm,
activities together. It was a very interfaith upbringing that I brought him in up in, and so I thought that I was doing the right thing, but for him to say that was an invitation for me to go, well, wait, what happened? What was I not familiar with in your experience? What was I
mhm,
not
mhm,
attuned to, right?
mhm,
And I think that that can go to like Brenda's question. How
mhm,
might we help people in our own congregations move from fear to hope,
mhm,
especially when holding on to the sameness? So, what is
mhm,
it? So, we ask people, well, what is it that you're feeling? How is it that you're understanding our situations? What is
mhm.
it that you're afraid of? And what is it that you believe in are really good foundational parts. But what is it that you would say to something like that?
Um, I think you started, you asked the question, what happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think um, maybe a different place is, and I don't have the answer. I want to be very
Yeah.
clear about
Yeah.
that. But I think something I'm curious about is where have you experienced love rising in your life?
Mm, mm,
If we cannot begin to pay attention to that, then so those who know me well or have heard me preach know that I usually refer to God as love, capital L,
mm.
because it seems to me, for me, and this is me, that scripture is a trajectory of discovery of love, capital L, and how it inhabits life.
Yeah.
And it's filled up with all kinds of messed up stuff, I'm going to be honest with you. But the trajectory keeps moving towards a greater and greater discovery of
Mhm.
how the creative inhabiting love of God permeates everything. So I
Yeah.
think, can we get in touch with people's experience? Where have you experienced deep love, which means also deep forgiveness, also means deep hope? Where have you seen, where have you discovered love's fashioning a reversal from what would be an expected outcome into something beautiful and good, which is what we call grace, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Begin to pay attention to where we've experienced that and connect our language
Mm,
to those experiences
yeah.
so that it's not just ideas, but what's been your experience of this transforming energy of love. And that when we speak of God, that's what we're speaking of. And can we begin to untangle the other stuff that's been attached to our language?
Yeah.
And it's a long process. This is a long process. It's not going to be one one thing. Um, I have to tell you, there's a comment here from a dear friend, Tom Brownfield, that I'd like to address.
Yes, please.
He talks where toxic masculinity is often rooted in fear of, uh, I'm not sure. I think there's a typo there, influence. So I want to name, I think, a deep call, and I'm feeling it quite personally in this season of my life, and I think for the next chapter of my work. I think there's a very important work that white male heterosexuals have a responsibility to engage, and it has to do with the dismantling of toxic masculinity.
Mm,
And I'm not saying
mm,
that we can do this alone without the help of women and so forth, or persons of color, but I'm saying, as a white male heterosexual person, there is particular work that we must take responsibility for in working with other men to begin to reshape what it means to be male
mm,
in a way that dismantles the energies that are so captivating and controlling and have for
mm,
forever. But its expression is now is especially toxic
Hmm. Hmm.
And can we begin, we must be at work helping men engage a different way.
Hmm.
And I think the degree to which the church really engages this work, white Christian nationalism, the fascism, and this is not just in our country, I mean, around the world, so much of it is driven by this energy. It may not be the only thing, but it is a crucial thing, it seems to me, that we
Yeah.
must address. And
Yeah.
and it will have to require a reformulation of spirituality and a really deep and renewed dive into Jesus and the way the
Yeah.
Jesus who is the Jesus that we see in the Gospels. And so, when we talk about the future of faith and the future of hope, this is one important piece, it seems to me, that if we don't tend, the other pieces will continue, and the experience of the wider human family will continue to languish. So
Yeah.
I I I really am convicted of the necessity of this. And I'm personally committed to working on that. I have been, but I just the older I get, the more I'm even more convicted of its
Yeah.
really a crucial work. So,
Yeah, and I know what I'm about to say is pretty controversial, and it's probably the first time I've said it out loud, but I actually feel bad for a lot of male identified folks because of the ways that they have to live up to the fiction that they've created for themselves.
mhm,
Right. While it is impactful on me as a female bodied presenting, queer person who's been poor my whole life, I understand what the impacts of that toxic masculinity has been on my life, but what has it been on the lives of the people that buy into it is also something that I don't think that we should forget about, right? Um, and just in the honor of time, I want to ask you one more question, not from our Q&A, but folks, if you have an answer or a question that we did not have an opportunity to get to, I hope that you do send me an email. You'll get an email within 72 hours with the link to this conversation to share with your partners. We'll have contact information on for either myself or Reverend David Long-Higgins here. But, we are the United Church of Christ, David. And
mhm.
so, my question to you is, what does it mean for us to be united and uniting when we talk about the future of our faith?
Yeah. So I think it really gets uh it really gets into um a consent to the motion of God,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is uh, to bring things together. The United Church of Christ was born at a time post World War II when there was a large the stir of ecumenism was strong and so forth. And there were a lot of, if you've studied history and polity, a lot of dimensions to this. So I don't mean to gloss over that. But I think at the very least, there was a recognition that um, the division of the world was not what God intends. And that too often the church was a mirror to what the world was like instead of an alternative.
Yeah.
And that to be united and uniting is to say, we will consent to God's pull to live into an alternative reality and energy to the one that oftentimes inhabits and shapes the life of the human experience and the
Yeah.
experience of the creation.
Yeah.
And so it's to be united and uniting is not just a good idea that people I thought up in some room someplace, but I think it was a prayerfully discerned discovery that this is the motion of God and the
Hmm.
desire of God,
Hmm.
the human family. And
Yeah.
if we can say yes to that more and more, we might ask different kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Instead of how do we just protect our turf, it might be how might we make ourselves available, recognizing that we live in a universe, in a creation filled with abundance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so it's an ongoing motion. And I love we're not just the unite. We maybe better should be called the unite. Our call is to be the united and uniting Church of Christ, right?
Yes.
And that's going to take a lot of different expressions. It might not always be organic mergers of denominational bodies, but it is an ethos and spirit.
Yeah.
And can we in our life keep that as the central ethos and orienting compass? Christ is a compass of our lives, and that everywhere Jesus goes, people who shouldn't be hanging out with each other discover each other and actually discover that they not only maybe like each other, but they certainly love each other.
Yeah.
And this is the experience post-Pentecost, right? The people who aren't
Yes.
supposed to be together are together.
Yeah.
So, we're really talking about a Pentecost church.
Yes.
How do we stay available to the inhabiting spirit that makes the old definitions not only irrelevant, but an obstacle
Mm.
to the new creation that God wants to form in life? Um,
Yeah.
so
I love this. I think this has been the quickest hour of
I,
my 2026. It's been I just could be in conversation with you for so much longer, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your wisdom. I'm grateful for the tone of your voice. I'm grateful for the joy and the metaphors and the love that you have and the music that you create and the things that you see in all of us. It is just such an honor and a gift to be here with you for our first conversation. And for those of you who have joined us live on our webinar today, for crowdsourcing the chat, sharing your emoticons, your questions, what a gift. What a gift it is to be in this virtual space, cultivating curiosity and care for all of God's people. I want to thank our tech and media team for helping to make this and all of our webinars possible in both live and post viewing form. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Our next webinar is going to be on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Let me get you that date. It is going to be the 26th, March 26th, Thursday, March 26th, for our next conversation around our impact of our faith and our environment. We are going to be in conversation with a pastor from a new plant church. I'm really excited for this. It is pastor and writer, Reverend David Cooper Ryder, who's going to be sharing a bit more about how our faith communities are called to be careful and in care with Mother Earth. What is it that we can learn with our encounters of nature? The webinar is called Flickering Encounters of Life with Life, how we can re-earth our spiritual practices. And so I hope that you join us on the 26th, and that if your questions weren't answered for tonight, you send me an email. But Rev, I'm going to turn it back over to you to give us a benediction to take us out.
I would be delighted. So two things before I do that. And some of you who've been around me know this, that I hope you'll never forget. One is that God can never cease to be love.
Mm,
Any articulation of theology or spirituality that moves away from that has moved away from the revelation that Jesus
yeah,
shows. The second is that your first name before any other name that you were given is beloved. Don't ever forget it. That is your core identity. So, remembering that, may you trust that God blesses you and keeps you, loves you and holds you, and that in and through your life, God desires to do some remarkable thing that will probably start small. Trust it, believe it, and know that in all things you are held in the heart of God. Blessings on you. May God keep you. Great to be with you.
Amen. Thank you. Peace and love, beloveds.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.